Moving on to our next speaker for today, who will talk about home as investment, real estate market outlook, and growth. He graduated from the University of Asia and the Pacific with a major in entrepreneurial management in 1994. He is co-founder and shareholder of the W Group, known in the industry for its world-class office buildings in Bonifacio Global City. Currently the CEO of Leechiu Property Consultants Incorporated, and has 26 years of experience in real estate and is considered the Philippines' leading commercial real estate broker. Let us all welcome Mr. David Leechiu.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much to TGFI and to OSHA for having me give my thoughts about the property market. So, sana we be able to share with you everything that we know about the market to help you become better investors in real estate, and not just in real estate, but in other platforms of investment. So, next slide. So, galing na ako sa New York a few weeks ago, and marami nagtanong sa akin about ano pa talaga nangyayari sa Pilipinas, bakit ang gulo-gulo? And ang response ko doon sa mga New Yorkers, both mga puti at saka mga Pinoy, is that, well, it's election time, what do you expect? Talagang maraming basurang kinakalkal ngayon sa ng mga politiko sa isa't isa. And pero I reminded them that Duterte has been a very good influence to the Philippines. He has been a very positive influence to the Philippines despite everything that you hear about him in the media. Regardless of what your color preference is, whether you're yellow, you're black, you're white, you're blue, you're orange, or whatever, I can say with a lot of confidence and certainty that the truth is behind what we say. And so I'm going to summarize to you lahat ng mga good points na nagawa ng administration na to that helped the Philippine property market. And it helped the Philippines through COVID. And if not for these reforms, COVID would have hit the Philippines much worse. Pero hindi. So, if I may, I'll just enumerate some of these things. Number one, in credit rating. Credit rating in the Philippines has been the best it's ever been in the last 40 years or even 50 years. And never in our lifetime did I ever imagine, or never in my parents' lifetime, did they ever imagine na magkakaganon yung credit rating ng Philippines. It is at investment grade. And yes, COVID is threatening that right now. But remember that 6 months into COVID, last year, the Philippines was one of only 11 countries in the world that got a credit rating upgrade. Many countries, about 25 countries, got a downgrade last year. We were not one of them. We were one of the few that ever got an upgrade. And why is the upgrade so important? It's because it will allow more money from abroad to come to the Philippines. Okay? So, next reason why the credit rating is so important is that yan ho yung nagpapabagsak ng interest rates sa Philippines. And that starts with the amount of interest that the government is able to borrow, at pangalawa, how much the banks are able to lend the private sector. And that's why it's so important. The better your credit rating, the lower the interest rates. The lower the interest rates, the more viable many construction and infrastructure projects become. Dati ho, when the credit rating of the Philippines was so poor, at saka yung at wala tayong pera, sobrang taas yung interest rates. The interest rates lent to us was 12, 15%. 18% per annum ng government to government. That's how much a T-bill would cost, or the 10-year treasury, the 20-year treasury, the 12-year treasury. And now those same treasuries are sub 5%. I think it's way below that now. And so because of that, it's allowed many projects to become viable that were not a viable project before. Second is tax reform. What many people forget is that this tax reform was made available and possible only because of the political capital of this president. No other leader in the world enjoys the the political capital that this president enjoys. No one in the world, not Trump, not Obama, not Putin, nobody except this guy. And kahit na, let's say, hindi ka naniniwala sa 92%, 95% or whatever credit rating, ibaba natin yung sa 70% na lang, not credit rating, but political rating. It's still the highest in the world of any leader on their last year of office. And so that tax reform, because of the political capital, allowed the president to update the tax bracketing of millions of Filipinos. Before this tax reform, everybody that is earning 40,000 pesos and above will pay 32% tax. Okay? Ngayon, ang nagbabayad na lang ng 32% tax is anyone earning 8 million pesos or more. Dati, maka 500,000 pesos ka lang ng income in 1 year, tatama ka na ng 32% tax. Ang bigat nun. So that's why hindi makaangat yung middle class. But now nagkaroon siya ng every person in the Philippines has been given anywhere from a 30% tax break to as much as a 10% tax break. So that's the lowest to the highest tax break level, which means that yung mga nagbabayad dati ng tax na 32%, baka 5% or 10% na lang binabayaran nila. Nagkaroon sila ng 25% savings in tax. And that translates to about 10,000 pesos a month, anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 pesos a month. And all that became affordable. And this happened 18 months ago. And frankly, after 1 day of making that into law and into reality for millions of people, very few people went to the president and said, thank you. And many business people, hardly anyone went to the president and to the Secretary of Finance, Annie Dominguez, to say thank you. Now, it didn't stop there because bababa yung income tax ng corporate income tax. Right now, during this tax reform, it was 30%, binaba nila to 25%, and it's going to go down to 20%. At 20%, it will make the Philippines one of the lowest tax regimes in the world. And at the moment, at 25, pumapantay lang tayo sa ibang countries in Southeast Asia. But the best benchmark for tax is corporate income tax is Singapore and Hong Kong at 16 and 17%. And sana dun tayo umabot. But at the meantime, at 25%, we're very good, but we will be even better at 20%. And what did the government do? Why did they say, uy, bawasan natin yung tax income from the Philippines? Why? Because ang na-realize nila is that it's better for the public to manage their funds and for the private sector to manage their own funds than the government managing their own funds. Third is the reserve ratio requirement. The reserve ratio requirement is the amount of money that each bank is required to keep in the bank. So every time you deposit money into the bank, let's say for every 100 pesos you put in the bank, the reserve ratio requirement requires banks to keep 20% in the vault, or 22%. So from that number, it's come down to 12, and it's on its way down to 8%. And that movement from 20% to 12% to 8% will release 2 trillion pesos of money that was stuck in the bank that they could not touch, the banks could not touch, to now all of a sudden 2 trillion can be lent out to the public. And that's going to be fantastic because additional liquidity on more money is going to be lent to the public without having the banks borrow more money or get more investments from the public. Pangatlo is infrastructure. Maraming hindi nakaka-realize na itong last 12 months and yung next 18 months is the biggest injection of infrastructure the Philippines has ever seen since World War II. Okay, we are building we have completed 120 kilometers of roads and bridges in the last 24 months. And the next 24 to 36 months, we'll see another completion, a completion of another 80 kilometers of roads and bridges, plus 16 airports in the pipeline. And that's in addition to the 12 that we have completed in the last 10 years. And all these airports will just mean better access to these islands and to these provinces than ever before. At ang dalawang pinakamagaling at mabigat na airport is the one in Cebu at the one in Clark. Yung Clark ho, magbubukas this year. Yung Cebu nagbukas 3-4 years ago. Pero it's not just Cebu, it's not just Clark. There's Iloilo, there's Puerto Princesa, there's Panglao Airport, there is all these other airports, Davao Airport that's being expanded right now, and all those airports are just going to mean a totally new experience for many Filipinos as well as foreigners. Bigla na lang pag pumasok ka ng Clark, hindi ka nadadaan ng NAIA. And that will make it so efficient. Your plane will land on time, it will leave on time, you will get out of the airport terminal in 10 minutes instead of 1 hour, and there's no traffic. And when you drive out of the airport, you go through Clark and some of the best highways the Philippines has ever built, and some of the best sceneries when you get out of Clark. And that's just going to propel the growth of the tourism market for North Luzon, which right now is still pathetically low. Most of the tourism in the Philippines is happening in the Visayas. Why? Because that's where the gorgeous beaches are and the gorgeous water. Pero there's also gorgeous beaches and water in Northern Luzon, except that they cannot access it right now. The infrastructure is going to change all that. The REIT law, we're talking about investments, and I would encourage everybody to put money in REITs. Why? Because para ka na ring naging owner ng mga buildings na yun by owning REITs. And the money you generate from it is tax-free regardless of how the market moves in the stock market. Up or down, it will continue to generate recurring income for investors in the REITs. So I suggest you go and buy yourself some REITs. And this REIT law was never possible until this administration came in and said, ano ba talagang problema ng REIT? Dahil 10 years na yan nakatenga sa batas at walang gumagawa ng REIT. So inayos nila yung REIT law, inedit nila, pinas nila, they made it into reality, and because of that, 5 REITs are in the market today and another 7 are in the pipeline. And more to come, so much more to come. And next is the timely funding. So the politicians will say, oh my God, the Philippines just over-borrowed and how are we going to pay for it? And per capita income, there's so much borrowing. Well, that's just half the story. Because actually, we were able to, prior to this administration, our GDP per debt ratio to GDP was 39%. And today it's approaching 60%, which is where it should have been in the first place. But we did not need to do all this borrowing until COVID came on board. Nung COVID came, we were in the best of health financially. I'm talking about the Philippine economy. We had the highest dollar reserves. We had the highest savings rates ever in all of Philippine history. We had the best credit rating ever in history at investment grade. And then we had so much liquidity in the market. Then we open up more liquidity because of the reserve requirement reduction. And then COVID came. Okay, when COVID came, we said, "Oh no, we need more," because besides funding all these projects like healthcare and infrastructure, we need social infrastructure. We need to support people who are going through COVID. We need to support the hospitals, etc. And the only way we could have done that at a time when COVID was shutting down the economy was to borrow more money. We are one of the few countries in the world that was able to borrow money, and this much money relative to the economy as a percentage of GDP precisely because we were in such good shape. Okay, and the Philippine government is not the only one doing that. Just search Google and look at the bonds raised by the developers and by the conglomerates in the Philippines. When COVID hit, they said, "Oh, hindi natin alam kung gaano kasama itong crisis na to. Hindi ko alam kung gaano kasama yung pagtama sa atin nito. Why don't we shore up cash?" Right? So habang nasasara yung mall, kasi nasara yung mall, nasara yung airport, nasara yung hotel, saan kukuha ng cash? Well, borrow ka na lang ng cash. At nakahiram sila from the banks. The banks were liquid enough to lend gazillions of pesos to the developers. In the same way, because of the financial health of the Philippine government, they went abroad and borrowed a lot of money to protect ourselves from COVID. That is why we had to do that. Now, the politicians will not explain it to you that way because all they want to do is take down political points. Okay? The next and last is PEZA. Okay? So PEZA has been incredible because PEZA, as you know, is the platform for BPOs and the platform for manufacturing. And the head of PEZA is Director General Charito Plaza, who has really shielded the BPO and manufacturing sector from all the hassle that they had to go through because of COVID. Okay, and she fought so much for and on behalf of these companies who are investing billions upon billions of dollars into the Philippine economy. How many BPO employees are there in the Philippines? The answer is 1.3 to 1.4 million people directly employed. There is probably 3 times that indirectly employed because of the BPO sector. And what was that number in year 2000? In year 2000, there were only 1,000 people employed in the BPO sector. And in 21 years, that 1,000 became 1.3, 1.4 million. They are the biggest driver of the economy after the overseas Filipino remittances. And so Director General Plaza held their hand, held the hand of the investors to be able to go and comfortably invest in the Philippines as COVID was making gulo. And so we have to thank the president, despite everything bad you heard about what he has done or allegedly done. We also have to thank Secretary Dominguez because really to be in government is a thankless job. And despite the strengths and weaknesses of the president, the Secretary Dominguez has gone in there to help the president manage this country through the best financial performance this country has ever had, through the most difficult crisis this country has ever had since the 80s. Now, I am 49 years old and I have been through a number of economic crises in my life. Not as much as my parents, but certainly I've been through enough. And I can tell you this crisis is not the same as the previous crisis. It is better pa. This crisis is hitting us hard, but not as hard as the crisis in the 80s. In the early 80s, late 70s. I can assure you that. Next. Because of all these reforms, office space continues to get taken up. Now, next slide, please. Office space continues to get taken up. Yung residential market po is still growing. People are still buying. And nag-record transactions pa rin kami from Quezon City all the way down to Alabang. From Puerto Princesa to San Vicente to Boracay. Kahit konti lang yung mga sales volume doon ngayon, pero they're being done still at record prices. So COVID has hit us hard, but it did not hit us to the point na babagsak bigla yung mga presyo. People are still buying at record prices. And the office space take-up is still growing. And at 500,000 square meters this year, we think this will be, this is still some of the highest office transactions in the world at 500,000 square meters of new leases all over the Philippines. And so COVID hit us hard, but it could be much, much, much worse. Next slide. All these reforms the president and the DOF have done under Sonny Dominguez has only benefited real estate. This is all the infrastructure projects that's coming online, and it's benefiting 40 million people who live in this map that you see here. 40 million people. These 40 million people are responsible for generating 60% of the GDP of the Philippines. And they are about to get the biggest injection of infrastructure this country has ever seen. Next. And the airports all over the Philippines. So what if the airport is new? Well, if you have not used the Puerto Princesa Airport or the Panglao Airport or the Iloilo Airport or the Caticlan Airport, or the Cebu Mactan Airport, please, I would encourage you to do so, because the experience in those airports will change your mind about the Philippines. Why? Because I travel often, and every time I come back to Naiya, nadidepress ako. You know, you had such a great time abroad, and pagdating mo sa Naiya, ang gulo-gulo, ang dumi-dumi, ang pangit-pangit, etc., etc., etc. But these new airports will change all that. Nakaka-inspire to walk into the Puerto Princesa Airport. Nakaka-inspire to walk into the Panglao Airport. And it's going to be so inspiring to walk through the Clark Airport. It's going to be fantastic. And it will change the experience of so many people going in and out of Philippines. Next. This is office demand. The yellow line shows you the amount of square meters taken up every quarter. And tignan mo, kahit bumagsak siya, it's still higher than any quarter during the first year of COVID. Second, it's come down only because of the lockdown that we experienced in the last 2 months of the second quarter, where it was locked down, or third quarter it was locked down. Because of those lockdown, hindi makapag-transact yung mga tenants. Next. A lot of companies were contracting during the pandemic, mainly the POGO sector. Pero tignan ho niyo yung yellow line yan, pababa ng pababa ng pababa. Dahil ang ibig sabihin niyan is that less and less companies are contracting. And in fact, if you correlate this to the previous slide, you will see that more and more companies are actually growing and less companies are contracting. Next. That's a very good sign of confidence for the future of the Philippines. Next slide. Next slide, please. I'll skip through this. For the interest of time, I will just hurry up with my slides. The rental rates sa office sector have come down, but they will move up fairly quickly, especially if the buildings are PEZA. So I would advise those of you who want to invest in office space, invest po kayo sa PEZA space. Next. Yung land values na tinutukoy natin kanina, lahat sila paakyat, pero lang yung the one sa Bay Area, because yun yung mga tinamaan very hard by POGO contractions, but it's on its way up again. Next. Next slide. Ito yung sinasabi natin sa REIT. No? So if you put money in REIT, it will give you dividends of 5 to 6% of your investment. But look at the capital appreciation. So the capital appreciation is anywhere from 3%, and that newly listed lang, yung Robinson's REIT is I think 3 to 5% appreciation. But if you look at companies like the Mega World REIT, it's come up so much. And if you look at the Ayala REIT, it's come up even more, 44%. This is capital appreciation in addition to the dividends that you get a year. at 5% dividend per annum. That's some of the highest yielding stocks you can own in the Philippine stock market. Okay, next. And this shows you the amount of sales, pre-selling activity in different categories in the property market. And yes, yung middle, lower middle, talagang tinamaan niya ng COVID. Pero pabango na sila ngayon, paahon na sila ngayon. Next. And to prove my point about all these reforms benefiting the Philippine property market, that COVID is hitting us hard, but it could be worse, but it is not. Ito ho yung orange line, which shows you capital values or purchase price in condominiums all across the 6 business districts in Metro Manila. So BGC, Taguig, Makati, Alabang, Ortigas, and the Bay Area. And you can see that prices generally have held all throughout the pandemic, even if, number one, the economy contracted by almost 10% in 2020. And number two, nagbagsakan ang rental rates, yung pag-upa ng mga units na to. Yung dating inuupahan ng 300,000 a month na condo unit, ngayon 100,000 na lang. Yung units na pinakaupahan for 20,000 is now siguro nasa 8 or 10,000 pesos na lang. So despite the contraction in the rents, many people continue to hold on to the prices of condominium units. Now, I'm not saying na meron mga na walang cheap deals dyan or distressed deals. Meron yun mga cheap deals and distressed deals. But predominantly, the market is holding. And I am sharing with you information from 525 buildings across 100 developers across 289,000 units. Okay, so yes, there are cheap deals in certain markets, certain buildings, certain units, but predominantly the market is holding. Okay, so please remember that. Next. And just to show you what to do during this pandemic, well, use this time to buy more assets. Dahil yung pandemic slowed down the appreciation of capital value all across asset classes. And habang ganyan, please buy more. Because pag nag-normalize na yung market, bibilis po ulit yung pag-appreciate ng assets all across the Philippines. And the best example I can give you is look at Metro Manila condominium space. These are different projects, the year of completion of these projects, the year of launch of these projects, and what they are priced today versus what their launch price was when they were first launched across the developments by Megaworld, by Robinsons, by SM, by Ayala, and Vista Land, the 5 biggest developers in the country. And the compounded annual growth rate of each of these assets, they are anywhere from a low of 7% per annum to as much as 17% per annum. And in any language, those are very good returns. And it's not just in Metro Manila. Next slide. It is also in many provinces where, again, the growth rates are between 7 to as much as 17%. This is my last slide. I want to, before I entertain questions from the audience, I want to reiterate, I am not blind to all the hardship this crisis has brought upon this country or the world. But I am telling you that despite the millions of jobs lost, despite the tens of thousands of businesses that have closed, despite all the hardship, all the people that have died, all the hospital bills that people cannot pay, despite all of these things, the property market is holding strong and well. I'm not saying that there are no distressed transactions. There are many distressed transactions, but overall, the market is holding. And that should inspire us to invest more, whether you invest in stocks or bonds or Philippine real estate. Please look at this crisis as an opportunity to invest when prices are growing slow. And with that, thank you for your time. And I will then check the chat box. So let me just bear with me while I go through this chat box. Aha. So, how do you address the impact of the pandemic in the real estate market, especially in 2022? I think, I don't know how many of you have seen me talk, but in the early part of the crisis, I was saying that by early of this year, we should be in a path of recovery. Hindi ho nangyari yun because despite the fact that vaccines were already made available as early as November of 2020 all over the world, we kind of messed up the negotiations. As a country, we messed up the negotiations with those vaccines. And so instead of the vaccines landing here in February, dumating ho siya dito meaningfully in September lang, August and October. So August, September, October. And it's only now that we're starting to see the cases drop because of the vaccination of Manila. And ngayon po, nahihirapan ho tayo sa country to distribute the vaccines all over the Philippines dahil panay isla ang Pilipinas. So, but I think we will overcome that, and that I'm very optimistic about 2022. Today, they just allowed the minors to go to the malls, and I think that's going to open up the mall business, and businesses in general will start to do better, be more profitable, and start to hire more people. Will housing prices go down in 2022? Some houses will go down. The high end has not come down. The high end market has gone up by as much as 50% to 300%. And yung middle, lower middle, yun ho talagang tinamaan. The default rates are the highest in the lower, middle, and low-end market. Pero babangin din ho yun in 2022. How are housing investments going to be easy for those beginners? For beginners for the beginners and you want to invest and make money as fast as possible, well, I think you just have to remember, work hard and be honest and be competent. That is my first advice on how to begin investing. Invest in yourself by building a good reputation about yourself, that you are a honest, sincere, competent person, and that you're smart and that you work very hard. None of this like YOLO moments, none of this like, life is short moments. Just work very hard. And there is virtue in loyalty in your company, okay? And there is virtue in waiting for rewards to happen instead of demanding for it. So the millennial mindset, we have to kind of shed that. Next is that I would continue to encourage people to limit your levels of debt, especially habang bata pa tayo. Please do not load up on debt. Work very hard, save money, and put it to good use in investing. You invest in stocks and in REITs and in real estate. And I guess we have to live as cheap as we can. So I would not encourage you to buy branded goods. And instead of spending 50,000 pesos on a bag, put that 50,000 pesos into real estate investments or buy REITs. Next is that you have to take advantage of this crisis because the developers have become so flexible during this COVID crisis. Please take advantage of that. When you feel weak and you want to console yourself and you say, kawawa naman ako, I want to buy myself a bag or I want to buy myself a nice car, forget it. Okay? Buy the nice car later when you have the nice house. Buy the nice car later when you have the nice real estate portfolio na. In the meantime, habang wala ka pang magandang real estate portfolio or magandang real estate na bahay or investment, huwag ka muna bumili ng magandang kotse. Okay? And then, talk to the developer and say, ito lang yung kaya ko. Can you accommodate me? Can you talk to me about more flexible terms? And the developer will say, you know what? Okay, sure. Dahil COVID, dahil ikaw, I will be more flexible with the terms. And please take advantage of that. With more and more business implementing work from home arrangements, employees, how do you see it impact housing, real estate industry? Voila. We are all going back to office for good or for bad. Whether you like it or not, we will be more efficient predominantly if we go back to office. Yes, there are some companies that will do better at home and they can do work from home better. But predominantly, almost everybody, 90% of the labor market will be more productive in the office. Some companies will move back to the office faster than others. With current interest rates at record lows, they won't stay this low for a long time. Yes, they will not stay this low for long, but that's why the stock market is doing so well. And so you can say, if you afford it, then yes, go and borrow. But kung medyo tight at medyo kulang yung savings natin, then better invest in the stock market. Dahil kung uutang kayo to invest in more real estate, medyo delikado yun, especially now. But the lower interest rates will just produce more housing for the market across all levels. And they, most especially, the lower income bracket real estate will do better and better and better from this point onwards because nag-open up na ulit yung economy. Based on your decades-long experience as a developer, in which market segment do you see the biggest chunk of the demand for housing? It is still Metro Manila and Metro Cebu because Metro Manila and Cebu have the highest population combined with the highest per capita income in the Philippines. The next best will be Cavite, Laguna, Rizal, Bulacan, and Pampanga. These regions surrounding Metro Manila, and then Iloilo and Bacolod, because they are benefiting significantly from the economic growth of Cebu. And then I am very excited for all of Palawan. And for you, I would suggest, if you can, when you are ready, please invest in Palawan also. Because magkakaroon ng tourism boom ang Pilipinas. I think tourism in the Philippines is 30 years behind that of Vietnam, behind that of Indonesia, behind that of Bali. And humahabol na tayo ngayon. To the point where I think tourism will be the biggest industry the Philippines will have. It will be bigger than remittances. It will be bigger than BPO within 10 years. At maghanda kayo for that. Enough quality housing options available for all households at all income levels. Well, more competition will drive developers to build better quality housing, better quality brands, better quality management, better quality construction, better quality design. So all those things will happen. I want to stress that today we built something like 55 to 60 townships all over Metro Manila. But what many people don't realize is we have built 120 townships all over the Philippines outside of Metro Manila. Ang daming townships ngayon that replicate what many people find in the West. So yung sidewalks, lighted streets at night, wala nung ganun sa probinsya before. Walang lighted streets at lighted sidewalks at night. Walang parks outside of Metro Manila before, and now you're finding those things. Walang mall, walang quality hotels before. Ngayon, you're finding those things now all over the Philippines. And so that's going to attract more capital from the overseas Filipino to invest more in the Philippines. Their hard-earned savings abroad. Please don't give it to your relatives. Please do not buy it for your secret jowa. Please do it to build businesses in the Philippines, because more and more economic activity is going to happen in the Philippines. Next is, as a property developer, you see challenges of raw materials, input cost, commodity prices on the rise. COVID produced a logistical nightmare for many supply chains, but that will fade after COVID. So yes, pamahal ngayon ng materials all over the world, pero bababa rin yan because magno-normalize post-COVID. When will post-COVID happen? Maybe 22, maybe 23, depending on the industry.